Hello, everyone. I'm Gemma Star, and welcome to another episode of Heart Warriors. Heart Warriors is a series I've been guided and inspired to do thanks to my energetic connection with Kata Judah. Kata Judah is our beautiful sacred masculine site in Central Australia, very close to Uluru, our sacred feminine site. So, what I'm here to do is to interview 100 men, and today we are up to number 97. Today's guest is a very special guest, and his name is David Sereda. And David is known for merging science and spirituality. He's a brilliant inventor. He's founder of Lightstream Technologies. He's an expert on the works of Tesla. He's also an author, speaker, and father of two beautiful girls. So he's got many fields of study, especially around science and spirituality. So really excited to get a look at how these two complement each other and how we can work it through consciousness and the magnetic field of the heart to create our best lives. So really excited to hearing all about David's journey into the heart and also about his areas of expertise that he can share with us. So thank you for watching and enjoy. David Sereda, welcome to Heart Warriors. How are you today?
Good. I've been in the garden so much and in the yard. I've actually been building these stone walls with my youngest daughter behind the house. And I've been carrying rocks that are way too big for me to be carrying around and thinking of the people who built the pyramids. And there's no way you could, manually lift stones like that. I've thrown my back out a few times, but I built a massive vegetable garden, lots of strawberries for my two daughters because they love strawberry smoothies. And it's real. I just love getting my hands in the creek and the dirt. And Astaria loves to get dirty every day. And her grandma just got her a bunch of white clothes, and I laughed because I said, you have no idea what's going to happen to these, because she's with me in the dirt every day playing in the creek. And so I'm good. I'm healing from the loss of my wife. About this August will be 2 years. So there, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. So I always like to start with asking the man for a little bit of information about himself, but not your external labels. I want to know about who the man is inside when you drop brilliant inventor, author, speaker, technology creator. Who's the man inside, David?
It's funny to be called a man.
Well,
It's funny because I don't even hear that word
okay.
in my life anymore. Like, nobody even refers to me as a man, and it's amazing because I love being a man. I'm a man, and I love the earth. As a kid, I grew up with there's five boys all together. My dad was getting a PhD in psychology at Berkeley in the 60s, and my brothers and I loved to ride our bikes and play in the creeks in the Berkeley Hills and get poison oak and scratch. And in those days, in the 60s, it was a different world than we live in today. But I think a man's childhood for me, childhood is the purest part of life, where you're just 100% you. And what did I like when I was a kid? Rocks. I love rocks. I love picking up rocks and looking at it. And, does this one sparkle? And I used to collect rocks. And my parents got divorced in the free love movement in the 60s. My mom, Linda, and my dad, Lynn, were divorced. And that was very difficult. And then my mom remarried so quickly, a military man, David Cooper, and he just took us boys on like we were his. And it was incredible. So you get shaped by your parents for sure, and you get shaped by your environment and the world that you're in. So So I grew up in San Francisco and Berkeley in the 60s, and I think that shaped me a lot with politically what was going on in those days. Very much affected me. My mom dragging us through the tear gas riots and hiding us under benches because the tear gas really burned. And I can remember that burning, from the Vietnam War protest riots really well, how much it burned my eyes. But we were tough little guys, we took a lot of beatings, we built forts in the hills of San Francisco, and we played war games with each other. And I remember the girls in the neighborhood that played the nurse. And I remember this one time that none of the boys wanted to play war anymore, because when the nurse lied you on the bed and she touched you with the cotton swabs, you literally went into a bliss state. There was so much purity and sweetness. And then pretty soon all the boys were fighting to lie down on the nurse's table.
Oh, great story, David. Thank you. So let's look a bit more at your childhood. What would you say was the major challenge you had to overcome that helped shape you into the man you were to become?
Well, a couple of things. One, the parental divorces are very difficult, and moving to different schools. I think I went to 9 different schools by the time I graduated from high school. And so losing your friends and losing your family, because at the age of 12, my mother divorced for the second time and sent us to our real father, who lived in Vancouver, BC, from California. And we cried, oh my God, for years, actually. I developed a lot of pain in my chest, and my father would stick his thumb and squeeze these lumps out of my chest and make me scream and do primal release therapy screaming. At the age of 12 and 13 is when I cried a lot. And I never really had my mother back in my life, other than as a casual friend, for the rest of my life. So I would say that really affected me. It affected my confidence in relationships with girls and women, and because I felt rejected by my mother, right? So it was hard to feel and create a trust bond, that was real.
Thank you for sharing that. So how did you ultimately work through that trust, learning to trust women again?
Well, when I had my first girlfriend in high school, it's interesting because she was a purist like me, worked at a health food store. We met at this health food store called Back to Eden. And we were reading this book called Survival in the 21st Century, which is all about becoming enlightened through raw and vegan foods, and that you were going to float through walls and become a light being. And that relationship with her, and she was removed from her family, and she lived in a tiny little apartment without parents, actually, and she was still in high school. So she was free of the parent, and unlike most of the other girls in our school, in our high school, she was able to get into relationships with boys that were full, complete relationships, sexual relationships, whereas a lot of the other parents held their daughters way back from the boys. And so I got into a relationship early that for me was paradise. I mean, it was unbelievable paradise. And you're trying to follow this noble idea that you're going to become a light being. And my dad, at the same time, had introduced us to meditation and Indian gurus, teachers from India who were in this enlightened state. And I started having mystical experiences. So the combination of meeting a person, a young woman who has the same ideals as me, for me, it was really funny because one winter when I was with her, Sue, my brothers all went to Alaska to have Christmas with my mom. And I was over it, I guess, because I thought, I don't need to go see my mom. She left us when I was 12. I'm like 18 or 19 now. So I didn't feel like going to Alaska to see her because I had Sue. So in a way, your first love, I guess, becomes the replacement for the mother. Not that she was anything like a mother, because she wasn't like a mother, my girlfriend, but you know, she was on she was on a spiritual path. And that for me, because we broke up after 3.5, 4 years, I forget how long that was. And I cried like a baby after that. I felt like I lost my mother again. And you go into this deep dark void and you don't know the way out. Like I didn't know the way out of the pain of the loss of my mother. And you can't, I mean, meditating every day, doing all these practices, doing all these yoga practices, and then eventually finding out, you know, a way in the world is the next step. And and being a purist, somebody who wants nothing more than to meet God and experience heaven on earth. That's a difficult road.
Right. So that sounds like a pretty amazing first relationship, you know, like already getting into the spiritual realm and the purest realm and finding God through a woman.
Oh, it was for me, and it was full on. Like we would just meditate for several hours a day together. And it got very intense as a relationship because I wanted enlightenment more than anything. The material things in the world didn't interest me that much. You know, I was very athletic, and we both decided to become tree planters. And being on this vegan diet, you know, I at one point, you know, when I met her, I had so much muscle. I mean, my legs were like, I was cycling and mountain climbing, and I grew up skiing out at Whistler, BC, and I was an intense mogul skier. And when I went on this diet that she put me on, which was actually fruit for a whole month, I lost all my muscle. And I went to go do this job that would require enormous physical strength, which is tree planting, because you have to plant at least 1,000 trees a day, 8 feet apart, approximately, to make any money at it. And I didn't have the muscle. And I remember her and I, you know, we broke up in the middle of that. And I stayed with tree planting and got my strength back and became a very top producing tree planter and stayed on my yoga path and my meditation path. And the thing about the path of meditation is that there's some kind of there's a lot of illusions and obstacles that you have to overcome. This idea that if you do everything perfect according to what your yoga teacher says, you do the breathing exercises, the concentration, you're going to get this bliss, this enormous bliss. And this what the yogis call the samadhi state of consciousness. And I've studied with a huge amount of teachers. Like I went to India and I was with a teacher named Punjaji, and I met the Dalai Lama and did his teaching. I did a lot of Buddhist based meditation, a lot of, all introduced to me through my father, by the way. A lot of the early breathing techniques, what were called rebirthings, which is a full body breathing that was really introduced by Leonard Orr. And Leonard Orr came way before Stanislav Grof and people like that who picked up on rebirthing after its first wave as a method of emotional trauma release and energizing the body. Um, and so I had all these techniques at my disposal. I mean, deep breathing, dancing, drumming, sitting in silence, doing Vipassana Buddhist meditation. And then my dad got into this guru, and I'm sure you've heard of him. His name was later Osho. He was called Rajneesh in the early days. And my dad started having all these classes in our house in Vancouver, BC. So we were exposed to it right in the middle of it.
Wow.
And my first girlfriend got heavily into it as well. And when we broke up, she just dove right into that movement. And I went to Oregon. This would have been 1981 or something like that, and lived in the ashram called Rajneeshpuram in Oregon, where we worked and I did a really hard job. I had to change all the tires on the heavy machinery. So they used to call me Conan there because I was lifting huge tires and I was, you know, But the funny thing is, when I was there, I was the only person in that community who wasn't with anybody. I didn't have a girlfriend in there because most of the women were much older, and I just couldn't, I just couldn't find anybody that I connected to there. But I was very into the teachings, and there were a lot of incredible meditations that Osho brought forward. I mean, a lot of breathing meditations, dancing meditations, shaking meditations, sitting meditations. And I got so much out of that. And also, I love the community there. I love the idea of living in a community where everybody was unified and had this same, you know, life design that was going to lead to this ultimate state of nirvana. And I just liked that so much. And I had so many friends there. In fact, I think I had more friends there than I ever had in high school. And there's something about, even though it fails miserably in the end, the whole thing, for people who saw Wild Wild Country, it really wasn't. I mean, it was partially like that in the film, but there's so much that film missed, which is how much fun we all had there. But I think that that is something the world really is losing at right now. They're losing at community. They're losing at the meaning of having a common goal to expand consciousness in a togetherness. There are so many different teachers out there spiritually, and the size of the movements are very, very small compared to what Osho amassed. And it was fun. It was incredible, all the people there. It was an amazing experience. I mean, you worked really hard, and you went to Magdalena at lunchtime, which was the cafeteria, which had hundreds and hundreds of tables. And we all got one beer at dinner time. And we didn't drink alcohol except for one beer. And it was hot, and we worked hard, and we danced, and we played hard. But I left there. I left that community, and I knew that Sheila was going to destroy the place. And I told it right to her face. I told her she was a selfish bitch, and you're going to ruin this whole place. I was in a private meeting with her, and she did. She ruined the whole place. So that was another major movement for me, is when I came out of there and I came into Hollywood in Los Angeles. When I got there were all these people that heard that I'd come out of that movement, and I really connected to a lot of people in Los Angeles that were people that wanted the spiritual experience, and they wanted to know, what happened to me there, and what was the way to, this higher state of consciousness. And so the people that started to shape me were more the people who were in this higher state of consciousness. And there were many teachers, Swami Sham, Mother Mira, Amma, Dalai Lama, Baba Hari Das, Ram Das. I met Ram Das a number of times. I mean, there are so many of them, but you had to find your way through it. You had to find a practice, a metaphysical practice that you could integrate into your life and do it every single day if you're going to get results. And I did that. And I did it, and I did it, and I never stopped meditating. And eventually I had to find my own way. I had to find the flaws in the teachings and find out what was missing to really take myself into these ultimate bliss states of consciousness that eventually are real. They really happen.
This is great. And meditation has come up several times, but I'd like to get, if you could speak to men. Well, I know it's men and women, but this show's directed at men. And how would you guide someone into meditation? How do you find this bliss state in meditation?
Well, the state now happens so easily. It's so easily. When I sit and meditate, I wait in the morning. I make myself a cup of mate, yerba mate, or some nice white tea, and I kind of make a fire in the house in the wintertime because we have a fireplace, and I do my own wood. And I just wait until I feel this resonance coming on, because what I learned is there has to be enough energy in your awareness field to go into the bliss state. And the bliss I'm talking about is blinding ecstasy. It's not adrenaline, it's not an emotional exhilaration type of high. It's so much better than that type of high. So if you look at our culture, I would say, is an adrenaline based junkie society. Like, we're adrenaline junkies. So if you look at everything we do, fast cars, excessive money, pornography, which rules the world, which is fast sex. It's not loving sex. There's no touching and kissing in pornography. There's no, feeling each other's electrical energy fields and tuning yourself to each other. We're an adrenaline, very short-term investment in ideas that can get us high, right? So you see today, before I describe this bliss state and how I go into it, what people are willing to do is take a pill. They're willing to take ayahuasca, but are they willing to really learn how to do this so that you can access this every day? In fact, when I go into this state, if I stayed in it, I eventually wouldn't be human anymore. It is so hard to be in this bliss, this enormous ecstasy that is so pure. And it truly, if I measured, okay, what is honestly the best human experience, I would have to say, is lovemaking, right? To your divine, my wife, right? When I co-created Astaria and brought her into the world, and Alera, my daughters, I would say the lovemaking of making with the intention to have a child is even more amazing than the lovemaking of just, you're in love and you're having great sex. So that climaxes and then it's over, right? And for some people, if their heart is open, there'll be endorphins, there'll be all these anandamides, which are bliss chemicals that you feel in the afterwards, after an orgasm climax, right? That radiates between you and your partner for quite a while. So but there's that bliss, right? And that's very nice. But what I experience now is so much better than even that. It's not that I wouldn't want that again in my life, because I don't have that, because I don't have a wife anymore. But the state I'm experiencing now dwarfs it like a supernova. So I can see the nobility of the idea of the way the saints, and it's controversial the way different saints approached enlightenment. Because if you get enlightenment by a certain means, you will tell your students that the only way to get there is by these means. But one of the teachers I saw in India, his name is Punjaji. He was a family man. He was married. He raised kids. And the Buddha was a family man. The Buddha was married to Yasodhara and produced one son, Rahula. And then he goes into the forest and, he searches for the means to get to this super enlightened state, nirvana. And Jesus, arguably, clearly in the Gospel of Philip, had children with Mary Magdalene. It's very clearly there. But for those who don't believe that and follow this all male idea that only males are going to live in celibacy together in a monastery, and women are separated and isolated in their monasteries, like Saint, because I studied the lives of many of the Christian and Catholic saints, and then you can look at somebody like William James, who was the primary American psychologist, really one of the founders of American psychology. And his book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, describes people who go into this state that I'm about to describe. But in his investigation, it happens when people give up, when they're no longer trying. And what I'm about to tell you is, this state is so easy when you finally find out where it is. And it's really real, because if I tell people to do a certain technique, they you have to imagine you start out with this very complex text series of techniques, and you're going to become more and more simple and more just you, and more eventually realize that it's exactly where you are, and you're already it, and you were already created by God, and you're already God and Goddess. So you're already got the Goddess in you. It's already there, but you thought you had to look. And when I went to see this guru Punjaji in India, he would get people to be laughing hysterically in front of him. And I was quite offended by it. I was really strict because I had done so much yoga, so many techniques. And here's this guy saying he's enlightened, and people are coming in front of him and they're laughing, and they think because they laugh, they got enlightened. And I was like, this guy's lying. I mean, this can't be real. Well, when it was my turn to meet the Papaji, the Punjaji, I said, I don't even want to meet him. I'm just going to hang out in the ashram, go to ashram every day and just watch everything. And finally, because I spent a long time there, I think I was in the ashram for over a month. And finally, I went to his house, and I was with my friend Gassan from Saudi Arabia. And Gassan, Punjaji was sick. And he looked really grumpy, and my friend Gassan gave him this bouquet of these huge, beautiful white flowers. And Gassan said, this guy, there's nothing going on here at all. And when I got to the hotel that night, I don't know what happened. I laughed for 2 hours straight. Like, I couldn't stop for 2 hours. This guru really got into me. And then I left him, and I went to Bodh Gaya, the place of Buddha's enlightenment, to come to the Bodhi tree, because I being a tree planter for 23 years, I planted trees, and I put my heart and soul into tree planting. I planted like 1.5 million trees in my life, and about 1 million of those are probably still alive, somewhere thereabout. And so for me, trees are really special. I feel them like living beings. I almost get more out of trees than I did out of my spiritual teachers. I mean, just sitting under a tree. And from the smell to the energy of the earth connection to the root system and the shade. And, I can really see why the Buddha got enlightened under the Bodhi tree, and Jesus, meditated under the olive trees in the Garden of Gethsemane, because there's something about trees that connects heaven to earth for me. And so that was my mantra, being a tree planter for 23 years, is bending down, doing a prostration, touching the earth, and putting a tree in the ground. And when I went to Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha got enlightened, I saw monks doing something there I had never seen before, because I'm used to the Buddhist Vipassana meditation and studying the Buddhist techniques, which I did for over 20 years, those techniques. And because I'm going to come to the bliss state here in a minute, but see, this is the way I talk. I'm going to give you the big answer and then come to the simple. And it's amazing. When I saw them, they would have these boards, and they would slide and do these prostrations down to the earth over and over and over again. In fact, these monks would spend more time doing that in Bodh Gaya at the Bodhi tree than sitting there in meditation. And you come to the Bodhi tree and you see these two big footprints, where it said that, and this is before the Buddha's full enlightenment, he stood there. Some monks say for 3 days, and some monks say for 3 weeks, and some say 3 months. I don't know anybody who could stand up for 3 days. So let's just start the first one without moving. But the Buddha was so high in his frequency and vibration, and so in awe of the Bodhi tree, and saw the tree as God in that moment, he couldn't move. And you think about, go back to the tree in the Garden of Eden, because there's one of the trees is the tree of life, and the other tree is the tree of judgment, which is good and evil, right? So the tree of life gives you eternal life. And so the Buddha is at this moment, Jesus is at this moment with the olive trees in the Garden of Gethsemane, and I'm seeing this other ritual that I've never seen before, and I realized I've already done that. I've bowed down, dug a hole, and put a tree in the ground 1.5 million prostrations in my life. So I've touched the earth that many times. And so you go to India and you study with these gurus. Ram Dass talks about And Ram Dass was so affected by Neem Karoli Baba, his guru. I don't think the guy could have a normal life with a woman and a family ever, because that bliss consciousness that hit him, that was transmitted from his teacher to him, was so profound. It heals all wounds. All wounds get healed by this bliss. And when what was going to be one of the greatest challenges of my life, which is when my wife, after our second child, became what is classically called mentally ill, but really isn't. That is not a fair word for it, because that's not what it really is. She's malnourished, and at the same time, because of her vegan diet and breastfeeding and her low electrolytes, which I learned about later, but she's having this spiritual connection to the divine. And she was really having this experience. And this experience for my wife was so deep that it fractured her, because the world doesn't have a place for women and men who go that deep. It doesn't support you. It's trying to keep you in this machine called money, and it's trying to keep you at a very superficial level of adrenaline, because we are an adrenaline based culture. Every type of high, like we reward athletes mega millions of dollars for getting us adrenalized, and you sitting in front of the TV set watching a baseball game or a football game or even a cricket game for that matter, and we're getting fired up with adrenaline. So in our culture, we pay people the most money who are masters of adrenaline. And believe it or not, even the porn star is a master of adrenaline. They are. And they get paid a lot of money, the superstars, right? And so then we go back to a teacher like Osho and say, oh my God, you taught sex and spirituality. You're a criminal. And I can't believe you did that. I mean, you're supposed to be celibate, right? And then yet, you look at the Catholic Church and you see what celibacy did to all those people, and how they abused so many children and beat children and murdered children because of their own frustration. So I got to, in my years before I met my wife, I was actually celibate 8 years doing all these practices so perfectly. And I started having blinding visions of Jesus in 1994, and I met my wife in about 2003. So I was celibate for 8 years when I met her. And when I met her, I there was such a huge age difference. I said to her, Mom, are you sure you know what you're doing? Because I'm a 42-year-old man and you're a 23-year-old young woman. And she said, yes, you're my soulmate. I know, because my psychic told me, and I had to listen to this tape she had. Our psychic actually described me perfectly. And I said, well, it's great for me, because I haven't been able to find anybody my whole life who wants to go on this spiritual path with me and find God in the kingdom of heaven. So when I started making love again, I noticed my meditation actually got better than it was when I was celibate. Because when I was celibate, I was having these out of body blinding visions of Christ, and the Virgin Mary started appearing to me, who I later found out was never a virgin at all, because the Bible tells us after Jesus was born, Joseph consummated the marriage and Jesus had brothers and sisters. It's right in the Bible. In Mark 6:1-8, it describes he had sisters. So that would be 2 or more girls and brothers. So that was a big family, right? So Mary I believe, Jesus was divinely created by God in her womb at the age of 12. But when she matured, Joseph and her had sex the regular way and had kids. So Jesus grew up with a big family. So when you find out by putting it to the test that real lovemaking enhances the meditation state and does not take anything away at all, and that you're struggling with celibacy ideas, which are brutal on the body and the kidneys. I could tell you lots of funny stories about my kidneys. So when that happened, I realized this whole thing is a lie. How do we how do we get to this blinding state of bliss that the yogis and the yoginis attained and talked about? Why did my teachers, many of my teachers were celibate since they were born, and some of them, like Punjaji, was a family man. And Punjaji could see, when people laughed in front of Punjaji, it wasn't because of any joke. There's no joke. You would just start laughing and you couldn't tell why, and then you're laughing your head off and you can't stop. And I watched him do this to people every day. I was in the ashram for a month. Another person just traveled halfway around the world to see this old man who had kids and had a wife and had everything. And all of a sudden they're laughing hysterically. And I'm like, what is it? Well, then it happened to me, right? Because I was stubborn. It took a long time. So now when I meditate, I've done so much frequency work on myself. I found one element that was missing in all my practices. So I did a lot of the breathing techniques. I did a lot of the sitting, staring into silence, and scanning the body for emotions and feelings and sensations, which is primarily a Buddhist technique. I did a lot of the fasting ideas, the perfect vegetarian diet, and even trying to be a vegan, which for me was quite a disaster because I just got too weak. I couldn't lift up rocks and things like that. And I found out that there was one thing missing, and that was what Pythagoras taught and the early Christians practiced, was a frequency practice. And it's in the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic. And the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic, which was practiced by the Church of James, the brother of Jesus. There are three James in the Christian story. There's James the Great, James the Lesser, and the brother, which is his real physical brother, who started the church in Jerusalem. And in their Lord's prayers, O thou from whom the breath of life comes, who fills all realms with sound, light, and vibration. So the sound part is a frequency toning practice that is using vowels to precise pitches, not just toning vowels at any old pitch. And my wife and I actually designed this because she was a singer. Crystal was a singer, a very beautiful operatic and jazz singer, trained in opera and jazz. And when I tuning my human instrument perfectly, it became the bliss started to show up. First it was once a month, and when it shows up, yeah, there's that scene in the movie with Jodie Foster, Contact, where she meets Matthew McConaughey's character, and he describes this religious experience he had and how nothing could touch it. That would happen once a month, and I thought, that's incredible, because I'm having this happen once a month. And then it got to be once a week, and all I'm doing is adding this new, and then I started working with very precise frequencies that are transmitted through the staff. Hence Jesus said in Mark 6:1-8, the apostles had to have their staff. And without going into that, by adding this frequency technique, eventually I saw in this insight state that the human being is a musical instrument. And if it's out of tune, like a ukulele that's badly tuned, and you start playing it, everybody's going to leave you and run away. When you're tuned perfectly, you realize that this universe is symbiotic. It's waiting for you to be in tune. So when you say be in tune, it's not like you're just going to be in tune on your own. You are literally going to tune. And I learned when I was in India with the Tibetans and sitting down with some very high Tibetan lamas in Dharamsala, that what you see in the West as Tibetan Buddhism is not at all Tibetan Buddhism. He said it's more of a westernized Indian-based Buddhism, but that's not what we practice. They practice sound. There's a lot of sound work in Tibetan Buddhism, a lot of it. And when you eventually come to this place that you're so tuned and you're so coherently you realize, see, you, Gemma, have your own tune. There's nobody else like you in the world. And when you're purely you, and I mean purely in tunely you, you hit you, and you're not going to be anybody else, just you. Because God created you so specially. The God has created you so specially. You, the day you were created as a living soul, you were already it. So perfect. And then when you can just sit there and be 100% you, the bliss comes. It really comes. And it's blinding. You feel that this is who you always were. You always were this state as a child. And as a child coming into this world, if people listened to you as a child, they would have found God. But then they tried to shape the children, right? They tried to tell us, well, you got to be like this. And you can't do that. You got to be like that. And that's how we got out of tune.
Well, this
And
is,
then we, yeah,
oh, so
yeah.
this is brilliant, David. I'll just, sorry for interrupting, but this subject of, we could, well, would you label it finding out authenticity, has come up a lot of times in the men's journeys in this.
Oh, really? Wow.
So this is, the important factor. And I just love how you bring the quantum field into it and bring it into, we've all got a unique frequency and attuning ourselves to that. So what practical, can we give a summary of practical ways that men listening can find their authentic frequency? What would you say to a man who asked you that question?
Well, you kind of already did it, because you have to go back to your childhood. You have to go back to, the man has to come in touch with the boy who'd like to play. And then, at a certain point, we're told what, how to behave. Don't make too much noise. I mean, I remember one time in the health food store, and my daughter was laughing in the line and playing. And this old woman said, could you tell your daughter to be quiet? And I said, no. And she said, can you tell your daughter to be quiet? And I said, no. I said, my daughter is happy. And this happiness, which has a high pitch to her voice, so many people destroy that in the child. They say, you see, I actually got, so I go on my phone here and I go to my frequency meter. Here's my frequency meter, and I turn it on. You see all these numbers are jumping around. Now, my daughter's voice, my youngest daughter, can pitch so high as a frequency, and I can look at the frequencies of her voice. And no two children, by the way, will be at the same frequency. The numbers are slightly different. And I can't pitch that high, because we start out at this really high frequency voice pattern, and then we start coming down. And as we become civilized, we don't usually use our voices more than 2 or 3 octaves of pitch, and that's it. We lost 8 octaves of range in our personality, even because we had to memorize facts in school. Fact memorization was made you smart, and if you didn't memorize facts, you weren't smart. So we took the child and we squished it into this narrow band frequency range, right? And then the other ways that our frequency range shrinks is when we socialize. Like, why do people meet in bars? Well, because the alcohol will take the edge off, right? And you get to kind of be wild and crazy a bit. And when we meet each other and we're more wild and crazy, we're more fun, right? Because we're like, and then people can fall in love. And then eventually you can behave that way at home, but you can't in public. So I think that's a huge part of it, is the man has to find the child, the boy, and he has to see how to integrate as a man with the boy, because we're all of it, right? Because one day I'm 62 this summer, so I'm going to be, the beginning of old age, right? That's really just the beginning of it. And then when I was up to 50 something, that's like middle age. And then, but all those stages are part of the man. And the use of tools and trades, and it's not that women don't use tools and trades, I'm just speaking in terms of men. Using a tool is a meditation. You know, if you're drilling a hole in a wall or hammering a nail and you miss, you hit your thumb and it hurts. Now they got nail guns, so you don't have to miss and hit your thumb anymore. But that's a focus, right? You're hitting the nail on the head. You're hitting the nail on the head. And I was doing that the other day because I moved a whole deck that I used nail guns, and those nails rotted and only in 4 years, and the whole deck fell apart. So I used really big nails and used a real hammer. And now, you know, where I moved the deck behind the creek, behind the house, it's going to stay there way longer because the nails are this thick. And I was thinking, this is meditation, right? Be here now, hammering this nail, just being in the present moment. But being in the present moment is not a, it's not a form of myopia where you're trying to concentrate too hard. It's more like you're just feeling yourself here now. Because when you feel yourself here now, you're so close to who you are, and the bliss is only a millimeter away. It's only a millimeter away. And when I first got seduced by the yogis of India that my father introduced me to, and they're talking about this bliss state and how if you're celibate and you only have sex once a month or once every 2 weeks with your girlfriend, and you're slowly going to get rid of sex, you're thinking this better be better than sex, because I'm young, right? And I'm a young man, and that desire is there every day with my girlfriend. So this better be better. And I saw that noble idea destroy relationships, completely destroy relationships. And those people never got the bliss, because the bliss doesn't come because you did a technique right, or you had the perfect vegan diet and you didn't cause any harm to an animal. That's not why it comes. In fact, the early Egyptians ate beef. The Tibetans are not vegetarians at all, not at all. And that was shocking to me. The vegetarian diet is an East Indian noble idea. It's not something, it's not, and you should see the way they treat the cows in India. It's not the way vegans would think. These cows are used for every inch of their worth. They are the saddest looking cows I've ever seen in my life. The cows I saw in India. I've never seen suffering like that in an animal ever. And yet they're vegetarian. They're not vegans. Vegan is a whole other idea. So again, if you do something perfect, will you get the bliss? And the answer is no. It doesn't even work that way. I defined this out. 45 years every day meditating. Now when I meditate, I accept whatever I ate that day. I don't judge anything at all. I don't judge any of my actions at all. But when you go into the bliss and you merge with your original child, you are exactly the way God created you. Exactly. You're not any different. You just find out that you were already created perfect, and you had to become all these other things, and eventually you become exactly where you started. And which is 100% natural. The child knows exactly where the bliss is. They can get hurt or hurt each other and forgive the very next day, and the very next day they're playing and laughing. They're so close to it. Now it's not the same, because the bliss that you reach when you master it is different than what the child experiences, but it's so close. They're only a millimeter apart. They're only a millimeter apart. And so when that arrives every day now, it's like the sun will rise tomorrow morning, whether it's cloudy in Australia or not, it will rise. And this inner state for me now will rise every day. I can guarantee, no matter how grumpy I get up from my sleep, as soon as I feel this resonance and I sit and meditate, it's going to come, and it's going to knock me out. And I think it's every human being's, it's their journey to find it, because that the promise in the end of the Bible is God will wipe every tear from every eye, and that's how it does it. That's how God does it. He doesn't do it because you were good. It doesn't do it because you got everything right and the other person didn't. It doesn't do it because you qualify. and the other person doesn't, it doesn't care what you did. You might have screwed up all over the place, but you finally just come back. And then it forgives everything you did, no matter how messed up it was. And it slowly it doesn't instantly make you a better person, but it slowly does. The bliss will slowly make you perfect the way you were created.
So good. Thank you for sharing that, David. I want to get into now the passing of your wife. We spoke before the show a bit about it, and you said, it was okay to bring this up because it is
Yeah.
recent. So I'd like you to talk about how you are dealing with that. How, because I mean, it happened at a stage of your life where you were already very spiritual and aware, and so how did you deal with the passing of your wife, and also acknowledging that you have two beautiful daughters there with you too who are still relatively young?
Well, exactly. See, when I lost my mother at 12 in my life, I cried every day for 2 or 3 years, and I didn't see the light at the end of the tunnel at all until I met my first girlfriend. And the pain of losing my mother was greater than the pain of losing my wife. But the pain of losing my wife was great, is very great. I cried a lot with my daughters, and we talked about her life every day, and we still do. There's not a day that we don't talk about her. And this August 9th will be 2 years, which is the anniversary of Nagasaki in Japan. The nuclear detonation of the city of Nagasaki is the day my wife ended her own life. And she, after our second daughter was born, she developed a postpartum illness that you could truly see in her face structure that her brain was suffering and dying. The way her eyes were set in her head, everything changed in her brain. And when I first met her, she had fibromyalgia, and fibromyalgia can be a trigger illness due to early childhood trauma. And my wife was abused at the age of 4 and the age of 6 or 7 in the school system in California, badly. It's very severe stuff. But yet, when we were together and she had her fibromyalgia, the way I dealt with it was I gave her massages on a massage table every day, and our life became about healing her pain. And she was taking 12 Tylenol a day when I met her, and I said, you have to get off the Tylenol. We have to deal with the pain a different way. So when a child is traumatized, the spasm in the heart and the connected nervous systems, the autonomic nervous system, the central nervous system, goes into such a deep shock that if the trauma is not cleared, it's not easy to clear trauma, then the fibromyalgia, it grows in consequence to that shock. And so she had it very bad. In fact, some days when we lived in Sedona, it was like living with an 80-year-old woman. She would walk so slowly and be in so much pain. And when we got out of Los Angeles, swimming in the creeks in Sedona seemed to really help her a lot, the fresh air. And it seemed there were times that she was really healing. I developed a lot of therapeutic technologies for healing. And when she would do sessions on my systems, which were largely inspired by my work and studies with Nikola Tesla and my years being director of Tesla Foundation in Los Angeles, I learned so much about Tesla coils and making coils for therapeutic purposes. When I would get her on my system, she would have a great day. There's no doubt. It was hard to get her to do that because after having children and nursing every day for 6 years straight with both girls, she was losing her calcium because her vegan diet, she wasn't getting enough of it. She lost so much salt. I looked at her blood work after she died, and her doctors did nothing about it. Her sodium was at a absolutely dangerous level. It was incredibly low. I mean, she should have been already dead. But they don't know anything about the dangers of electrolytes. So if our electrolytes get too low, which is your calcium, potassium, magnesium, your sodium, and your phosphorus, and you got to eat from all your food groups to get all of those, right? So your calcium, for a vegan to get enough calcium and breastfeed is very difficult. It will start stealing it from your bones. And you need electrolytes for electrical function of the nervous system and the brain. In fact, they now know that Bruce Lee died because he had no salt in him. My wife had no salt. Her salt was incredibly low. So I didn't know what was causing this postpartum illness, but I can now tell so many people, including men, that you got it. You got, especially in the summer when it's hot. That's why we give horses salt licks, because you can't lose your salt. That's how Bruce Lee died. It's in his medical files. I read his actual medical files. So if you drink too much water and you're not putting salt in your water, you're losing your electrolytes and the brain will die. So when my wife was falling apart in the beginning, when it first started happening, when Astaria was born, or my youngest daughter, I, of course, being a health food guy my whole life and studying back to Eden and survival in the 21st century, I thought I knew everything. And we got to find the answer to this. And I didn't know, I never heard of such a thing in my life or anybody close to me who was mentally ill. So with a father as a psychologist, I couldn't go there because this wasn't a psychological problem. It was actually a physiological problem. And I'm watching my wife suffer. And one day I pulled over and asked the police for help, and they threw me in jail and they mistreated my youngest daughter. And I was in jail. Nobody asked me why I asked for help. All I knew was my wife needs to go to the hospital because I don't know what's wrong with her. And I suffered in that jail cell in Canada brutally. And then when they let me out, they still didn't want to know why I asked for help. So I ended up, and this is the part that's really the most painful to answer your question, is when you go into the mainstream medical world with this type of illness, the way I saw her get treated and the lies, I could write a whole book on this, and is the most painful part of it. They treated her like a criminal. She was thrown in prisons, in with mental institutions in Prescott, Arizona, and taken into court in chains as if she was a dangerous person. She had never hurt a fly. She had never hurt her children ever. But they thought because she was mentally ill, she might, so she had to be chained up. That's the most painful part, not her death. Because in her death, she freed herself from the system. And the system, once you go in that world, because you don't, the doctors, when they do the blood work, they don't say do you know what happens when your calcium crashes? You hallucinate. My wife was having audio hallucinations. And another sign of calcium, her hair was falling out and her skin was so dry in her hands it was cracking, and she's breastfeeding the baby. And nobody's telling her this. The midwife isn't telling her this. Nobody knows. It's that simple. You cannot live on this vegan diet. You have to get enough calcium to be nursing these children for 6 years straight. You have to get enough salt. You have to get enough potassium, which is in your fruit. You have to get enough magnesium and phosphorus, which is in the grains. And she wasn't eating any grains. So, except for a tiny bit of Ezekiel bread, every day. So what was happening to her was physiological, but they label it mental illness. And the painful part in the end is watching her brain deteriorate, watching her face structure and her head. It looks like it's shrinking and collapsing. And they're injecting her every month with so many antipsychotic drugs intravenously in order to live with us legally and be with her children. She was their prisoner. And quite honestly, the hospitals in Arizona and San Francisco, where she started in rich neighborhoods, were far worse than the hospitals in Canada in small towns, which is where we are now. And they're both bad because none of them treat the blood. None of them look at electrolytes and do anything about it. And the person is treated like a criminal. So she was forced by law to take these injections. And we all know she fought and used every ounce of strength she had to be with her family, her children, and me, and barely be alive and be spending 3 months at a time in these facilities and coming out. And the stuff that was coming out of her head and what she talked about is just, you just can't place it. Her brain is gone. And finally, on that day in August 9th, 2021, she said she didn't want to be their prisoner anymore. She was strong enough to end her life in nature in a peaceful way and make it all stop. And that was painful, but it was also because, believe it or not, even through this period, I would always ask God, like when we were on the road and she was going in these hospitals and I've got 2 daughters to take care of, and I meditate and the bliss would come and fill me up brighter than the sun. And I would say, God, what is this? Because there's no answer here other than the bliss eradicates all the suffering. And then when I come out of the state, I'm dealing with hospitals and threats from child custody that think that my kids might be in danger, so they need to be removed. That there's no greater suffering that I've ever experienced in my life than the government coming in and making threats. I've never known a suffering like that. And in fact, you could shoot me and make me wake up and bleed and shoot me again, and that would be easier than the pain of losing my little Alira and Astaria. It would be far greater. Just keep shooting me. That's what I said to God. I can't lose my girls. And I'm losing my wife, but I can't lose them. And I went to court and fought without a lawyer and won and got them to back off. And just to get rid of them was healing for me so much, to just keep those government people out of my family. I felt so much better. And then when Crystal died, we all cried, my daughters and I, but we even they knew at their ages how much their mom was beaten and suffered so much because the doctors didn't know how to treat her. They didn't look at her blood because I went through her medical files after, because I found them, and there it is. Her salt is like, there were hikers in California, a study done. So in the summer, they're drinking too much water, they're hiking in Yosemite, and their sodium went down to 132, and they had grand mal seizures and permanent brain damage at 132. That's where my wife was. She was at 132. And then she went up to 134. And then she eventually got up to 130 something, but it still wasn't very good. And again, what they say is if your sodium stays low, I'm saying this to breastfeeding moms, and if there's any dads out there, you've seen your wife go through this, you've got to get her electrolytes up. And you've got to get the phosphorus in the grains. So if you eat chicken because they eat grains, you're going to get phosphorus. And your brain can't live without phosphorus. It can't live without potassium, and that's in potatoes and bananas and fruit. Fruit juice is full of phosphorus. And then your calcium is obvious, right? It's in the dairy, and it's also in carrot juice. Well, you're not going to get, vegans are going to get very little calcium unless you supplement it. Breastfeeding moms like crazy. It's your primary electrolyte. So you're getting electricity from calcium. It's not just for the bones. You store it in the bones. Your bones are made out of calcium, which is a metal, by the way. It's not chalk, it's a metal. And you have collagen in your bones to give it elasticity, and you've got some trace minerals in your bones. You have phosphorus in your bones, and you have magnesium in your bones. So your bones are storing the material to produce electricity to keep the brain alive. And I had to learn all this after I lost my wife because the doctors weren't doing their job. They were just pumping her full of drugs. And I think the painful part in the end is finding out that nobody did their job right in the chain of command. And I read a lot of books on bipolar schizophrenia after it happened. And I really started to understand more what happens when a person goes into this state. And of course it can happen to men. It can happen to men who work hard in the sun and drink too much water. It can happen to men who eat these diets where they just have a beer and a hamburger, and they don't eat any fruit. So where are you going to get your phosphorus if you don't eat any fruit? Your brain needs all of these electrolytes. There's 5 major electrolytes, or it won't live. It'll die. And I think a lot of the massive increase in suicides and mental illnesses we're seeing are exacerbated by poor electrolytes in the diet, because people don't eat from those 5 food groups. They'll only eat from 2 of them. Like they'll have the hamburger and fries and a beer, and they'll go to the gym. And then people say, oh, don't eat carbs. Well, carbs is where all your phosphates and your magnesium are. You're going to have a heart attack. And that's what they're seeing now. They're seeing a lot of people are having heart attacks who are going on these diets, these keto diets, and they're not getting any phosphorus or magnesium. So
Fascinating. Thanks for that insight,
the
David.
pain, though, I want to go back to the pain really quick, though, because the pain, if I didn't go into this state every day, where would I get the bliss to? And bliss and love are the same. It's just the bliss is love in a much higher frequency. So the godly bliss is a higher frequency of the human love state. But it's amazing, and I'm sure so many people have experienced this, because we fall in love, we make babies, and we break up, right? People break up. I see it all the time, because that bliss state we're able to go into with that person made us think, let's make some babies, it's going to be great. And then we don't know how to do it. And I've seen this, of course, my parents, right? I lived with parents who continued to get divorced. And how much the world needs these teachings to teach people how to find and activate the frequencies in their body to come back to that, to be able to access that bliss state every day. That's what keeps me alive today. That's what gives me the love to feed my children love, because we don't live on bread alone. We live on love. And if we don't get any love, we malfunction. And every day I think of my wife. Every day the loss is immense, because when I'm not in the bliss state, I'm still mourning. But when I'm in the bliss state, everything's fine. It is fine as roses, even where she is now, because she still communicates with me very clearly. Everything's fine as roses. But when the bliss goes away, because I do all the dishes, I'm on the floors and I scrub the floors. I don't use mops because I can't get into the corners. The vacuum cleaner never gets in the closet, because my kids are that age, right? And they want to play. And so they make messes like you wouldn't believe. And I don't like messes, so I got to clean them up. I do the laundry, I do the cooking, I run my business, I drive my kids to school, I do all of it, teach them how to ski. So it's just me.
That's great, David. So you've got these 2 beautiful girls and you're a single dad. What advice have you got for dads out there who are raising girls alone? Like, it's a whole set of new challenges, isn't it, than raising boys?
Well, it's funny because my youngest daughter, Astaria, who's still 7, will be 8 on September 11th, told me Alira got her period, Dad. And I'm like, how come my daughter didn't tell me? So I had to go to my daughter. And this is being a single parent dad. And I said, Alira, did you watch a YouTube video on how to take care of yourself? Do you know what you're doing? And that's difficult, because even though we talked our way through that conversation and she's confident, that's what her mom should have done, right? And that's sad. That was sad for me to come, because she's going to be 13 this October of this year, and I thought, wow, you know I'm just heartbroken. She didn't have her mom to go to that intimate feminine stuff, right? And I have to do it all. I mean, she has her grandma, but she didn't ask her grandma to help her with her feminine hygiene stuff. So she just felt, I mean, Alira is a survivor. She's a survivor of a parent who had developed this illness and died from it. I know so many. I know from my outreach of people that I know from a close friend that he used to cycle with this woman every day, and she hung herself and had two small children, and her husband was a chef. And it's different when it surprises the husband. He didn't see it coming. I saw it coming. I knew this was coming. I prepared my daughters for it in advance, so it wouldn't be as painful. But my oldest daughter is a survivor because she was so mature when it happened. She understood it. My youngest daughter sees her mom in heaven in dreams, saw her mom glowing like the sun in front of her in the middle of the night. She bolted out of bed and she's looking at her mother with a circle of white in a white dress. So you get those spiritual confirmations that Crystal has really, it's really illuminated and free of that brain, because it's that brain that from the early childhood trauma. I mean, how many men out there are married to a woman or in a relationship with a woman who had some form of abuse in their life? And it would be a lot, because there's so much abuse in our culture. And how I'd long for purity, how I'd long for the spiritual kingdom where the evil is separated from the pure. And our world used to be a much more pure place. Like, to me, when I look at you, you look like such a pure, you're a purist. You look so pure. But see, but we live in a world that's really hard. Like, you had to raise children, and we want to be pure. We want to be that sensitive male. We want to be the male that can slow down and feel and share your emotions, even. I'm the kind of guy who cries a lot in movies, who, you know, cries at certain very touching things that happen in life. I'm not sobbing all the time. It's funny, about emotions and bliss, because when the bliss comes in, all the emotions, they get purified. They get very, very pure. Like, for me, one of the greatest moments of my day is when Astaria is passed out and I look at her little face and she's sleeping. And what I feel, I'm right inside of her heart. I just feel her heart like the sun. And I mean, I used to cry when Alira would fall asleep in the back of the car in her baby car seat. And I just look back there and I just be crying driving my car. I love my kids that much. Like, I don't think you can get bliss without having the heart open. I don't think there's a way to circumvent the heart feeling human love first before you can get bliss. That's another insight.
Well,
You can't have a closed heart
this is
and
exactly
get
the
that.
subject I wanted to get into, David. The heart and the magnetic field and emotions and love and frequency vibration. Let's merge the whole lot. Normally we run for about an hour and a half. We got about 20 minutes left, but I'm more than happy to go over if you have the time. But can we get into this subject about open heart and emotions and bring the science into it? Talk to men so that they can maybe get
Well, I could get, I mean, really into, because I've had this conversation with many men. I've had this, and this is an intimate moment. I remember when I first met my wife, it's actually Dan Aykroyd who introduced her to me at the House of Blues and sat her down in front of me for dinner, because I was doing my film with Dan Aykroyd, Unplugged on UFOs. And he met her on the street, and she went to the same high school as me, of course, but years younger than me, 18 years younger than me. And I remember when we first kissed, and she put her hands on the top of my head, which is my crown chakra, and my brain had so much pleasure with her fingernails on my head. It was like exploding in real physical orgasmic ecstasy. And I've had this conversation with many men, is where do you feel, orgasm and sexual energy? And most men will only report the first chakra. And I thought that's amazing. And then there's this other phenomenon, which there was an article in the New York Times about this called ASMR, which is this tingly feeling you get when somebody's doing something. And I remember when Crystal would be hanging the art in the house, and we had this fight about where paintings go and she's an interior designer and I'm not. And I just love the feminine presence coming in the house and rearranging everything. And she would do it so slowly, and my brain would have these little tingles. It's a physical kind of bliss. And I could feel it in my neck and my heart, my arms. And I thought, I wonder how many people feel this. I wonder if Crystal knows what I feel right now when she's just, hammering a little nail in, going to hang up the painting here. No, I don't like it there. And I'm just watching her do it. Maybe the sensitivity from meditating so much allows me to have these more physical, nurturing kind of bliss. My brother Michael reports the same type of sensations. And when people type on a keyboard, you know that your keyboard are little quartz crystal wafers. And when you touch it, it emits a little electric charge. And even when I was a kid, and my dad was typing on his early Apple computers, it would put me in a trance just from the sound of the keys. But I never realized there's a piezoelectric pressure electrical response to crystals. So I would feel feelings in my body all over, these feelings I would get in the top of my head from, kissing. And that's what I feel. If I was to say something to men, is how can you expand your sensitivity in your body? And when you're making love to your wife, do you feel the pleasure just in the first chakra? Can you feel it in the feet and hands? Because I can, intensely in the feet and hands and the head and the chest. And so I think that's like today, sadly, I mean, even in Europe, they're using pornography as a form of sex education. And to me, that is not sex education. In fact, I teach my daughter, I have these conversations with her in the car, that just touching or holding hands can be really incredible. Just going for a walk with a boy and holding hands. And my daughter reported this. This was a few years ago, where there was a boy in school and he touched her on the top of the head. And she said, I've never felt anything like that in my life. And I was so happy that she has that sensitivity in her. Maybe because of all the years of meditation I did, my children will have this ability, and they'll start with that and they'll take it further than I did. And maybe where the nervous system opens up, because my dad is a psychologist. He's an educational psychologist from Berkeley, and he said there are more than 9 neurochemicals, and the adrenaline based high versus anandamides. And it's funny that in India they call bliss ananda, and there's a chemical called anandamides. And there's all these different chemicals, remember the author of Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus?
Hey, John Gray, he's on the series as well. He's about
Right, I interviewed
42, I
him.
think.
What's the chemicals he talks about? He talks about the love chemicals in the body. We have so many chemicals. In fact, the chemical that people are, when they do ayahuasca, what is that chemical called again, that when they do this hallucinogen? I don't know what it's called because I've never done it, but
I've done it either.
yeah, see, they'll take a pill to have that experience, but your body produces those chemicals naturally if you know. Yeah, the breathing techniques really help. Like, because if you open up your breath, like every 2 months, I've been doing this for 13 years. I do 45 minutes a day of deep breathing for 30 days in a row. So in July, I'll start again. I've been doing this for 13 years. So it's a breathe into the belly, sips of air, expand the chest, top of the lungs. I don't force the air out. So in through the nose, out through the mouth. I do that for 45 minutes in a row every day. Because you know what happens a lot in our life is if I didn't do my breathing exercises and meditation, the pain of losing my wife, I would contract, tighten, 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 really tight. And my breathing is going to get really, it's going to have this tight range. I'm not going to be getting a lot of oxygen. And then, you know what a lot of men do? They take up running. I mean, I used to be a runner when I was young. I used to do long distance running until tree planting destroyed my back. But I'm still able to ski until my back goes out. But that's one way that people can really get their breath going in sports. So again, but they're mostly breathing. What I learned in this breathing technique is where you focus. So when you breathe, you're going to awaken this life force energy. It will go where you tell it to go. So if I'm thinking, sports and adrenaline, and I'm running, or I mean, it's really interesting, and studies have been done on this. So for people, please don't be ashamed when I say this, but humans have a sex thought on average. When I say on average, it's like, it depends what age you're in. It's like almost on average every 8 seconds or something like that. It's really amazing. So, but as we get older, that gets less, that gets less, that gets less. It's a natural process, right? But if we're thinking of that and then we're doing breathing, then we're sending more energy there. But what if we were thinking of love, and when you're breathing and you're running and you're sending energy to your heart? What if we stopped and noticed? Because one thing I've noticed since my wife's been gone, and yes, I love making love to her, but I loved her presence in the house. It didn't matter what she was doing down there, like throwing a load of laundry in, or just sweeping. It doesn't matter. There's the presence of the woman in the house is so wonderful. She's home. She's here. You can feel her down there. And when she's gone, you go, oh my God, like she just had to be here to light up the house. She just had to be home so you could feel her presence to light up the house. And when that's gone, you go, wow, like there's so many levels to the relationship. So how, when we breathe, what we think about, the energy goes there. And if you only send it to one place, it's just going to keep going there. But when we send it to love, and we really honor the love part of each other, and then you if you're really aware, you'll notice there's an actual frequency that the man perceives and the woman perceives in the man in the relationship, and they have a sound. There is a sound, and your voice is part of the sound, but it's not the whole thing. The voice is a huge part of it. I mean, Crystal was a singer, so I could say that her singing voice had this incredible beauty to it, but it's more than that, because they don't even have to speak, and they have a sound. They have a certain tonal frequency vibe about them, and every woman is different. They're not the same. And that is when see, this is what meditation does to you, is you start, when you, these other qualities, you start to notice them. Whatever you notice grows, right? So if I only notice the sex part, then that part will grow, and then, well, it's quite complex, because it actually gives you less pleasure in time than it does compared to these other feelings I'm talking about. Like when my wife is arranging things in the house, and she'll really, she'll pick something up and she'll set it down. In fact, when you're really good at meditation, just looking at your coffee cup or your tea cup, because I don't drink a lot of coffee, I drink tea, and you look at it and you set it down and you're totally aware, it can be a profound experience. In fact, there are whole Buddha sutras of the Buddha. The whole sutra is the Buddha, getting up and moving his robe to the side and standing up and putting his foot on the ground. That's the whole sutra. Like the awareness of the most simple act can be the most profound.
Well, are we talking about presence?
It's presence, because
This is a beautiful masculine quality, and one that, through our culture and our society is very lacking in the majority of men. So apart from meditation, what can you say to men about presence and the importance of it, and the beauty that it brings into a
I
man's
love
life?
your questions.
And
No one has
especially
ever.
when especially when there's a woman there, what gift can a man's presence give to a woman? All these subjects.
Well, it gives what she notices, right? So if she notices when he's gentle with her, and sometimes when he's not gentle with her, because you don't want to be gentle all the time, because some things we do are highly energized, adrenalized, and some things we do are just a gentle touch can be so powerful, or a gentle word or a powerful word, right? A man can sometimes forget to tell the woman how incredible she is, and even say in his own words how he feels that she's even there in his life. Because when we take each other for granted and we don't say those things to each other, maybe that's why one of us leaves, at a certain point. I've never been a quitter ever. I hung in there, and I could say that I experienced a lot of abuse in the state that my wife was in, knowing that it wasn't who she really was. But I could say that I hung out to the bitter end. I did. I hung out to the bitter end. I never cheated on her. I had opportunities, especially when I was younger, but I never cheated on my wife. But I could say that maybe I didn't slow down enough to tell her in my own words how I felt, and when she was just there, right? What is it like? How could you use poetry to discuss in a relationship? We can all use poetry. Most of us have read poetry. If you listen to a song, you listen to poetry, because a song is poetry. How can you describe to your beloved how you feel? And maybe we don't take enough time to do that. Maybe that it would be, and sometimes we are moving incredibly fast, because when the amount of money a couple has to make to raise kids is so staggering, and you love them so much, sometimes you forget to stop and notice each other because you're moving so fast, and you're scared that, I would wake up in the middle of the night. I've got two daughters. What would happen if I ran out of money? Oh my God, what would I do? What would I do? And I think even if you don't have children, you can have that thought, right? Like, what if I get injured? And because I've been severely injured and lying there and unable to move, what would I do then? Right? Those we have our fears, and maybe we don't communicate those enough to each other. And the other thing is, it's really true, and this is more, we can't expect each other to have all of a sudden take each other to the same state that we were in when we were in the romantic phase of the relationship every day. We have to work at that. So if I would tell Crystal this before she died, if I could transfer this bliss I feel to you right now, all your problems would be gone. But her physical brain was dying, and I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know that all her electrolytes were in dire straits, because the doctors didn't tell me, and they didn't tell her mother, and it was right there in the files. But there, we can't be I wish it was one thing I wish is when the yogis from India came and said, you're going to do these meditations and in 7 years, you're going to reach full enlightenment. I wish it was that easy, because it's in our culture, it's not, because we have way more pressure on us and each other to survive in our culture than they do. Even though they live in poverty, a lot of people in India, they actually have less pressure. They don't feel, they can accept poverty. So imagine if in America, Canada, or in Australia, you could accept total poverty and live in a shack, be perfectly happy and go swim in the river and, wear the simplest clothes. You would put no pressure on yourself. That would help you tremendously to reach bliss. It actually would. But in our culture, you hit rock bottom, there's no mercy. You can see the homeless on the streets. Like in the city I grew up in, San Francisco, what's happened to it is unbelievable. What happened to Los Angeles, where I spent 25 years, it's unbelievable what's happened to it in that city. And the way people are living, piled up in apartments, living in garages and cars and sleeping on balconies. And oh my God, I mean, I know tons of women that I've talked to that have been in that same position where they live out of their cars and they got a job. So yeah, like that, when you come together and you create a child, that fear gets way bigger, because they're going to use all your money.
Oh, I love it. I love your beautifully grounded perspective. Are you okay if we continue for
Yeah, we can
longer?
continue longer. Astoria, are you okay?
Okay.
Okay, all right.
Well, I'd like to open it up, David. Now, we need to be selective here because you've got such a broad range of fascinating subjects. But just for the last, bit that we're going to talk about now, what do you think is important to bring into this conversation around masculinity and men?
Well, I think I saw this a very profound post of a video of all the things men do. And when I say this, I don't mean that women can't do the same things if they want to. I don't think it's very feminine myself to see women, building steel buildings and working underneath cars. But if a girl wants to do that, I don't have any judgment about it. You be who you want to be. But it's funny, I don't know what it is. And it's just there are certain things that men are so good at, and the whole world would fall apart if they stopped doing it. And yet those jobs may not pay that well. I mean, I know from being a tree planter and being a top tree planter who was so physically fit that I would produce the highest numbers in the crew most of the time. And then eventually I decided that this is killing my body and I'm going to slow down and do a better job and make less money just to save my body. I mean, I would say to a lot of men that so many of us men, because we think women want us to have this perfect body that is flawless, we work so hard at it that so many of us actually injure ourselves severely, as I did, because I pushed myself so hard in skiing and tree planting and skydiving and sports that I did some pretty severe injury to my lower spine. And I'd say sometimes we go the extra mile and we'd like to prove, like you see what's happening in sports today. You see these kids skiing off these huge cliffs and skiing like in the Chugach in Alaska, the steepest chutes, and they're doing backflips. And how many of them die doing their sport? You know what the funny thing is? I remember when I was a teenager in high school in the summer, my first girlfriend, Sue, we weren't boyfriend, girlfriend yet. I jumped the 110-foot cliff in the waterfall. Who was I trying to impress? Her. I was trying to show her, I'm going to jump higher than any other guy, and you're watching, and that's great. And if I die, she saw me die, and I hadn't even asked her out yet. And then eventually all the other guys did it. And this is what we do to each other, guys, as we go further and further. And next thing you know, we're dying in our sports. Ask yourself, are you doing this for you? Because you're making videos of it and I watch these videos all the time because I look at, okay, that's an adrenaline based high. I know that high so well because I used to jump out of airplanes. I jumped out of an airplane from 30,000 feet and trained at Edwards Air Force Base. And I jumped at night. I've got 3 skydiving licenses. I was an extreme skier, used to jump off cornices. So I know that high really well, the wahoo. But who are you doing it for? Is it really just for you? Just honestly answer the question. Or do you want everybody to see you to say you are the baddest ass? You got the best backflip. There's nobody better than you. But then who are you trying to impress? I mean, honestly, because you're pushing yourself in your sport and you're dying out there. You're dying out there in your sports. And who did you do it for? In fact, I saw this extreme snowboarder guy with 2 kids and a wife up at Whistler. This was only a few years ago. And he dies at his sport. So you're not dad. You don't get to be a dad anymore. You killed yourself. How far does it have to go? How Superman do you have to be loved? Are you doing this to be loved by the world, your woman or your divine life partner, whoever that is?
David, can I ask you a question around this? People like that are extreme in being the best, are they doing it for external validation? What is it? What's the motivation behind that? Are they lacking self-worth, and do they need to work on that?
Well, it's very complicated. I actually think
is the problem.
I don't think anybody cares how good they are. In fact, when people watch them do these black flips, because my daughter tells me every day, I'm driving her to school and she sees these cliffs on the side of the road. She goes, I could jump that. How big is that? Like, because she jumps cliffs into the lake and she's 12, right? And, this desire to fly, I think the desire to fly is innately spiritual. But the adrenaline high you get, okay, if I imagine how high you get, because I've jumped 35-foot cornices into avalanche chutes like this. I've jumped out of airplanes. And then I go into the bliss state. If I had a graph, so here's the high of the cliff, and the bliss is way up here. And the high of the best orgasm of your life might be higher than that cliff, but the bliss is way up here. Now, does that mean I become a celibate and get rid of the sex? No. In fact, you don't have to get rid of everything, but you can still jump the cliff. And you can still, but you know why God still does that is that you're going to get to compare. So how high am I getting? I'm risking my life. Now, I don't do those things anymore because I have these girls. I will never risk my life. I know dads. Yeah, this happened here. In the last year, we had 2 police officers die in an avalanche skidooing, and one of them was a dad with 2 kids. And there was an avalanche danger, duly noted and posted. And why did he do it? Why did he take that risk? Because for him, he doesn't know how to get higher than that. But what about your wife and your kids? They get me really high, because when you're plugged in, you feel your children. You feel your divine love partner. You're right inside of the field. And when you're inside of the field, the quality of the high is way better than that stuff. Because I've done all those things. I can compare them. I know what it's like to be a top athlete, an extreme, cyclist with incredible, racing speed, skill, huge legs, muscles rippling everywhere. And then I know what it's like to be, fat and out of shape. And the quality that I get in the bliss blows everything away. And it's innately human, because we are a heaven. Each one of us is a heaven. We were created by the Creator. And whether you believe in God or not, as an intelligence and as a being, or you believe in Jesus and Mary Magdalene like I do, and Jesus's family, well, and whatever you believe in, you're a potential heaven. I should say a potential heaven, because we have heaven within us. And so if you really honestly look at your civilization, well, there used to be temples everywhere, pyramids and temples, and we don't see a football stadium in ancient Egypt. We see the pyramid. And yet they obviously knew how to build this pyramid and levitate these stones, because I've been lifting stones that are about 200 pounds and setting them in place and going into the forest and throwing them in the back of my Toyota truck with my daughter Astaria with me, and because I'm building this rock wall right now. So at my age, I'm lifting freaking huge rocks, and they're sometimes they throw my back out and I can't get out of bed, and I go heal my back and I go and do it again. That part of the man still wants to be grounded in a real earth activity. But to answer the question, why do we do it? See, I don't have a woman anymore, so I'm not trying to impress Crystal by lifting. Look, Crystal, I'm lifting a 200-pound rock. There's nobody watching. So I don't know who I'm doing it for. I really don't know. But I love rocks and I love building stuff. I think when you build something yourself, you feel like you actually are alive and you're real, because you really did something with a rock.
Yeah, so good, David.
I don't know.
Well, I know we could go on for so much longer, but we really need to start wrapping up. And I love how, we got into the heart and the energies, and, you're bringing it back into your own experience. And so, but I'd like to for you to let people know where they can find you and what you're up to these days. And then after that, I'll ask you to deliver one final message for men, please.
So my website is my name. It's David Sereda, and Sereda means Wednesday. It's Sereda. So davidsereda.co. My mouth gets really dry when I talk. So, and one last message. I mean, davidsereda.co is my website. I sell a lot of therapeutic frequency devices. We have frequency beds. We have frequency staffs and wands and coil systems. And, in the same way that people who live in the Scandinavian or northern countries were encountering depression from not getting enough ultraviolet light because they lived in the far north, so many people work indoors these days, they don't get exposed to enough of the natural frequencies. So I design systems to really enliven the body and the energy field that help tune your nervous system into these perfect harmonies that I'm talking about. That's been my life's work. And if I would say one last message, if one thing was missing in my entire spiritual practice, it was understanding the human body and nervous system as a musical instrument that needs to be tuned every day, and to stay in tune, literally to stay in tune. And by tuning the instrument, like imagine if I was a rock band and I never tuned my instruments, I'd be the most unpopular rock band. So you are a rock band, but if you don't tune your instrument, nobody's going to want to listen to you. I think that would be my message to humanity, because the early Christians did this technique. The ancient Greeks did this technique, Pythagoreans, and even earlier than Pythagoras. We lost touch with understanding the human musical instrument is a very sophisticated instrument. It's more sophisticated than this because it has billions and billions of quantum sensors in it. It can feel so much more than we're taught. If anything we need to do is include in our education a way to open up the human nervous system potential to feel way more than we feel, right? Rather than I'm going to go on a vacation to this environment and that, I'm going to go to Tahiti, then I'm going to go to the Bahamas, and then I'm going to be happy if I go on all these vacations. So I have this exterior sensation of different environments and beauty to entertain. See, entertaining the senses is very different than opening up the nervous system to the full potential of the human being to feel. Because where it peaks is the ultimate, when the halo, you see the halo around the saints, you don't have to be a saint to have your halo field open up. A family person can do this. And when the halo opens up, what you're going to experience is going to dwarf everything you've ever known in your life. And that is our potential. I think we need an education system around opening up and tuning the human nervous system. And that's what on my website, my entire life work is devoted to, is giving people systems and the ability to, and the knowledge and the coursing to really work with this. This is a frequency instrument that we have here. We've barely begun to understand how to operate this thing. I think that would be my last message.
Oh,
I don't have all the answers. I still suffer, to some degree. You know what's funny though now? Even when I I actually with my nail gun shot a nail through my hand, and I don't notice suffering anymore on the physical level. On the emotional level, I still suffer the loss of Crystal, but because I go into this bliss every day, I'm not lost in a black hole of suffering the way a lot of people would be. I should be lost in a black hole. And I would say that I attribute, the frequency work and the breath work and the meditation work as the greatest investment. If I could invest anything, like if you ask me right now, would I rather have all Bill Gates's money or have as much money as I have, and be in the access, the state of consciousness I can reach, I would not want to be Bill Gates.
Same. Yeah.
Or Elon Musk.
Yeah. No.
No. And I think most people would rather be them than anybody else too. I think most people, maybe there's some that don't want to be them, that would like to be somebody else, but
this brings us right back full circle to what we were talking about. There's only our unique frequency, and when we find that, we find our bliss point. So we've done the full circle.
We've done the full circle.
Yeah, brilliant.
God did not make a mistake when God created you perfectly. You were created perfectly.
That's a beautiful message out there for everyone. Wow, thank you so much, David. I've loved this.
Yeah, so nice to meet you.
So
all right.
Yeah, everyone, thanks for watching. There's still another 97, 3 episodes of Heart Warriors to go before we wrap up the series.
If you need some people, I have a guy that I think you should interview, but you can chat with it in the email about it.
Yeah, great.
He's an artist.
Okay, I've got 2 spots left. I've been keeping them. I want number 100 to be someone special. I've got someone in mind, but I was still just waiting before I approached them. But I know I'm on to you about someone else as well.
Thank you for doing this. I love that you're doing this. I don't think anybody has ever really done this. I really honor you and your insight to even do this. Right.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, I woke up with a message one day. Oh, I'm going to interview 100 men. And so that was it. I didn't question it. I just did it. Started at number 1. So and that was
good for you.
Mid-July. So we'll wrap up by then, and it'll have taken a year. But I've also done an offshoot series called Man Speak, which I've done 22 episodes of. And that was because some people like yourself had such a beautiful wisdom about certain subjects, and there we dedicate a whole program to one certain subject instead of trying to break it up and cover a lifetime of experience in one episode. We take it over to Man Speak. So there's a possibility in the future, if you'd like to do another episode, it'll be on, we can do it on Man Speak, and then you can pick your favorite subject and talk for 90 minutes on that.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you so much for doing this. It's really meanful. Really is. Right. Okay, have a good night.
I'll just keep going if I can, David.
For sure, yeah.
All right, thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
A story